Hey, random strangers! Thank you so much last time for your very nice welcome back messages and just for bearing with how slow these reactions have been coming out. I am working towards a schedule where I can take a bit more time out of my real life and my job and spend it on what really matters, which of course is to watch more anime. Before the recap, here was like a bit of awesome trivia sent in by Lol. What about Archer's snake eye and the parallel between him and the biblical representation of the snake in the Garden of Eden? So the catalyst that Tokiomi used to try to summon Gil in the first place was an ancient fossil of the first skin shed by a snake, which in the Gilgamesh context is the result of a snake having stolen a plant that would have granted Gil immortality and thus shedding its skin, which functions as both part of the greater epic and as a fabulistic origin story for the phenomenon. Yeah, thank you for that. Also, interestingly, Tokiomi is partnered with the church. So it kind of by proxy sets up this conflict between Tokiomi and Archer symbolically. You know, it's kind of like the church versus the devil. So Fate's last two episodes covered several kind of prolonged battles. First was that showdown between the temporary alliance between Saber, Kiritsugu, Rider and Waver, and Lancer against Caster and Ryuunosuke, which ended in us finally witnessing Saber's true power in the form of Excalibur. And then there was that like rage-filled confrontation between Tokiomi and Kariya. Then that super long, or what felt like it was a super long, kind of like Star Wars fight between Archer and Berserker. Berserker at this stage is kind of a relative black box compared to what we know about the other characters already. But even then, we got insights into some pretty complex themes and some stark differences between each of the characters in terms of their different values and their flaws too. There was Kiritsugu's manipulative utilitarianism versus Saber and Lance's idealism and their importance on honor. And then we saw like Saber's self-sacrifice versus the selfishness of other characters like Kirei and Archer and Ryuunosuke. There was Dad of the Year Tokiomi and his obsession with legacy versus Kariya's hate for mages like that who dehumanize people in pursuit of that legacy. And we also learned more about why Ryder still thinks Saber's idea of kingship is misguided and kind of sad. So there were some great comments we'll get to as well. Overall, I still feel like Fate Zero has been awesome at using these physical clashes to set up deeper clashes between very incompatible philosophies and sort of laying out the strengths and weaknesses of each mindset. Even with characters that you are meant to hate, and I'd put Tokiomi sort of squarely in that basket, they have motivations that aren't entirely unreasonable. And I just love that complexity in writing. Okay, here we go with the recap. First off, I just want to say I feel so bad for all the normie humans in Fate Zero. Like, they are there just to be monster food and or to be like confused and just really scared shitless. I still don't know how the cover on this covert holy war wasn't completely blown by the appearance of this giant tentacled monster in the city's harbor. Apparently the fog was like thick enough to shield most eyes, but it was bad. So bad that Risu, I feel, lost a few years of his life to this stress. And I'm pretty sure that they also would have had to like obviate, erase the memories of a lot of the people that were standing very close by the water's edge. Oh, and by the way, Caster's monster, as it like regenerated itself, like the visuals and especially sort of like the squelching sound effects was disgusting. It was really good stuff. As they started to attack Caster, frustratingly, Saber was doing that same thing that she did before when facing him in the forest, just madly hacking away at the tentacles and getting nowhere. And I think I remember questioning her intellectual capacity for battle strategy and just the very undisciplined way that she runs into these fights with nothing but hopium. And this episode just really added to that doubt. I didn't want to doubt Saber. Like, given the caliber of her opponents, though, that sort of tunnel vision was never going to win her any fights. So I am still a little bit miffed by her lack of adaptability and tactical thinking. To me, it doesn't really accord with the legend of King Arthur, who was both a benevolent ruler and a very intelligent one. But I can also see why she's like that. I surmise that maybe the age at which she became king could partly explain this sort of stubbornness, even in battle. Being so young and inexperienced, but also having to make the decisions of a king probably meant that she had to show her strength by just putting her foot down constantly and never yielding. And as that became a habit, it turned into this general unwillingness to deviate from a predetermined course, even if it would benefit her. It might also have developed her mindset that she has to solve everything on her own and win every fight on her own. So add all of that to her insistence on fighting honorably as a knight. I think that makes Saber very vulnerable to being manipulated or overpowered by more wily opponents who won't fight fairly. Her unchangeability makes her predictable. And someone who takes great advantage of that is Kiritsugu, which we'll talk about later, who, as her master, is technically on her side, but not really. Like, theirs is a partnership not of common purpose. You know, they are fundamentally so different to each other that I'm still kind of waiting on the edge of my seat for when their cooperation will just blow up sky high. Saber is overconfident in her abilities and she tends to underestimate her opponents. She got very tired during that fight, which is understandable, but still was unable to come up with anything other than to just persevere and to keep relying on her brute force. It was Ryder actually who had to call out and be like, yo, this isn't working, let's fall back. And ironically, Saber responded with like, don't be stupid, we have to stop him right here. Because if anyone was being stupid, it was probably her, even though I hate to say it. There is a Sun Tzu quote about knowing when to fight and when not to fight, and Saber sure as hell doesn't practice it. Even when she did retreat, it was very reluctant, and she just couldn't help but slash at a few more tentacles before heading back to shore. Speaking of overconfidence, Archer was also doing what he does best, sitting back comfortably and heaping disdain on the plebs down below who can't even put Caster down. Like, to him, everyone's a dog. But there are some dogs who are more tolerable than others. Tokiomi is not one of those. During the fight against Caster, it was interesting that Tokiomi, he genuinely wanted to get rid of him. Unlike Saber or Arisville, he wasn't motivated by protecting the people who were exposed, but he was invested in killing Caster to protect the secrecy of the mages and also to bring honor to the Torsaka name. There was also, of course, like this bonus command seal that was at stake. So like Kiritsugu, Tokiomi is really an ends justifies the means kind of guy. The same motivations, like protecting his family's legacy, can lead to some very morally different outcomes. It made him want to get rid of Caster, which is great, but it also drove his decision to give Sakura away and generally see people as either assets or liabilities rather than actual people. So does that make him an asshole? Yes, I would say so. He absolutely should care more about the humanity of others and just not subsume everything under his obsession with legacy. But nor does he pretend to be like he's anything other than what he is. Do you guys notice how Tokiomi's relationship with Asha is super toxic? Even though Tokiomi seems to be all submissive towards Archer, there is definitely a mutual disdain there for each other. Tokiomi, he needs Archer obviously to cooperate in order to win the grail and get to the root. But to do that, he has to constantly cajole and flatter and stroke Archer's ego just to get him to lift a finger. And even then, it is not guaranteed that he will actually be helpful. And for his part, Archer sees all humans as worms, basically, and Tokiomi is no different. In fact, to have a worm as his master and try to order him around is despicable. The cracks in their partnership really become clear in moments like when Archer ignored Tokiomi's pleas to help take down Caster. For a second, Tokiomi thought that he had succeeded in convincing Archer to just get off his butt. Archer had, casually fired off 4 of his swords, and I bet he got a rush looking down from on high while Saber looked up at him in a bit of shock and awe. But they hadn't accounted for the pace of Caster's regeneration. So when the swords didn't work, Archer packed up his toys and was like, I'm out. Kind of like a big baby, like a big entitled baby king who believes that he owes nothing to anyone. And maybe he doesn't. Did I feel bad for Tokiomi? Kinda. But also he should have known that this was going to happen. That when he tried pushing Archer to destroy Caster with one of his most powerful attacks, using something called the Sword of Rupture, it really pushed Archer's button. And it was probably a touch of go there whether Archer wouldn't just off him right then and there. And Tokiomi looked legitimately scared. For a moment, I think he considered using a command seal, but worried that it might ruin his relationship with Archer, and also it would have defeated the whole purpose of getting an extra command seal. At first I was like, what relationship, Tokiomi? But then I was like, okay, maybe Tokiomi's right to worry. Who's to know what Archer might do if Tokiomi ever forced him to obey with command seal? Which kind of led me to wonder, can servants kill their own masters? And I concluded no, because I assume there's some kind of pact in the master-servant contract that prevents that. Also, given how Archer is taking the long way of co-opting Kirei into his plans to get rid of Tokiomi, it seems that servants can't directly harm their masters. But also, I was like, again, could you really not have seen this coming, Tokiomi? Is he so blindly confident in his ability to flatter and manipulate Archer that he ruled out Archer just walking away from the fight? It was weird, how he thought he ever had any semblance of control over Archer. Clearly, Archer thinks nothing of him. Or I don't know, maybe whether this moment was more him expressing very rarely emotion, the emotion of extreme frustration that things just weren't going according to plan. Maybe the only thing keeping Tokiomi alive is the fact that Gil isn't completely bored with him yet. Not because Tokiomi himself is entertaining. To Gil, Tokiomi is mind-numbingly boring. He acts like he has a stick up his ass all the time and tries too hard to manipulate him through naked flattery. Archer probably also finds Tokiomi's quite haughty dedication to the root and his traditional ways quite stuffy and annoying. But I think he continues to tolerate Tokiomi because, one, he probably gets a kick out of watching Tokiomi struggle to control him, and two, he is working towards that final sweet moment of betrayal, and he's slowly savoring the process. Remember, he is obsessed with suffering, and Tokiomi is just one more toy he can make suffer. So this relationship between Archer and Tokiomi was always going to lead to betrayal. As soon as Tokiomi got bored of toying with Tokiomi. Why does Archer like Kirei more? And I think it's because they are kindred spirits of a sort. I mean, as much as any two totally self-interested individuals can be kindred spirits, Archer prefers how Kirei is more upfront, I think, about his motives and doesn't bother putting on a fake face. He also sensed and was right about Kirei's own twisted obsession with suffering, which he finds fascinating and also aligns with his own conception of suffering as something beautiful. When I actually imagine Tokiomi trying to sidle up to Gil and Kirei, I think of that how do you do, fellow kids meme. He's just not on their wavelength, and his attempts to relate to them both end up having the opposite effect. And he's probably going to end up dead because of that. Berserker rocked up and knocked Archer down a notch or two, which I highly enjoyed. He somehow hijacked and commandeered one of the fighter jets And then Archer gave Tokiomi permission to deal with Kariya, probably because he's still butthurt about how Berserker showed him up the previous time. So I wholeheartedly agree with Thomas815, who wrote, "Shout out to Berserker for being able to catch Gilgamesh off guard a second time, even if it was just a little bit and without any real consequence. Yes, it only happened because Berserker fought with all their might and Gil was just playing around half bored, but still, it shows that underestimating his enemies can cause problems, even for someone as mighty as Gilgamesh." Archer's pride and authority were being challenged, so he saw fit to take action. Funnily enough, his storehouse of treasures included a very futuristic-looking fighter jet. I'm not sure which period in history he would have collected that from. Anyway, I felt that the Star Wars reenactment went on for maybe a tad too long. Every time I thought we were done, we'd cut back to Berserker and Archer shooting at each other and doing the pew pew. So I wonder if they cut a lot of that out in the edited version. Who knows? At one point in the battle, Archer was enjoying himself. Berserker had some crazy dodge moves and missiles that redirected themselves in midair, so it was quote-unquote fun. For a while, his fighting style is very unpredictable, and that kept Archer on his toes, which solves his boredom problem. But it wasn't fun anymore when he got blindsided by Berserker's purple sparkly gun and once again was bested by the mongrel. Berserker may be insane, but he is incredibly adept at exploiting Archer's weaknesses when they fight. He was able to dodge or deflect very powerful attacks from Archer by using these quick, evasive maneuvers and getting within a closer range. He also effectively neutralized Archer's reliance on range attacks. It became harder and harder for Archer to demean Berserker as just a mongrel when he's being matched blow for blow. So that is why Berserker challenged Archer's complacency and his sense of superiority, which I am all here for. Let's talk about the showdown between Tokiomi and Kariya. Tokiomi shaming Kariya for abandoning magecraft and dishonoring his family's name was so condescending and in a way tone deaf, because these are things that Kariya clearly doesn't care about and actively opposes. What Kariya does care for is how Tokiomi could be so inhuman as to give Sakura to Zorken. And of course, in Tokiomi's mind, to even ask such a question was stupid. Logically, that was the only way that he could give Sakura a bright future. So watching these two have or try to have a conversation was like watching two ships just sail past each other in the night. There was no point of connection or any sort of mutual understanding. And so the question we had to ask ourselves was, do we buy Tokiomi's explanation for why giving Sakura away to the Matos was the right decision? Essentially, it was because apparently only one child can inherit the family's power, which means that if you have two kids, one of them is probably going to end up close to, if not a full normie human being, which is the worst possible outcome for someone who comes from an old, powerful mage family. Or is it? I had no idea whether there is any truth to what Tokiomi is saying about how the transference of power works, or whether he is just clinging to traditions that don't really need to be clung to at the expense of his kids. But it turns out that he has a point. He's not just mindlessly regurgitating tradition. And I know that because you guys came through with some really good explanations of what Tokiomi was referring to here, so I'm very grateful for that. Here's the comment from Oberon127, which I feel is worth reading in full. The crux of the one mage child per family tradition is the magic crest, which isn't touched on much in Zero. Essentially, each mage family has a magic crest, a sort of tattoo that is the crystallization of the family's entire legacy of magical research and development. It serves as a springboard for each inheritor to quickly catch up to their predecessor's understanding. The mage who bears the crest then adds to it over the course of their lifetime, then passes it down to their child to add to and pass on over and over. The crest isn't just a design, but a magical object in its own right. It can't be copied or split, only transferred. Yeah, so I feel like this cannot be split thing is key. While it isn't impossible or completely unheard of for a family to train multiple children, only one can have the crest, which means the other is going to take decades at best playing catch up to the family's advanced magical understanding built up in the crest, and very likely never significantly contributes to advancing that understanding for the next generation. Not that they could add those developments into the crest even if they did. In light of that fact, mage families almost universally train only one successor, even when they have multiple children, focusing fully on the development of their crest for future generations. As a side note, this is also a large part of the reason why new mages like Waver tend to be looked down upon by the traditionalists of the Mage Association. They have no crests to draw on, will likely never contribute to the progression of magecraft as a whole, and any new crest and legacy they will create will be centuries behind. I do, though, want to see if Waver can turn that situation on its head. Like, maybe he develops an innovative way to short-circuit this whole process. Okay, continue. None of this is to say that there isn't plenty of noble aristocratic superiority complexes going on in the Mage Association and its families, because there certainly is. But there is a very real rationale that these traditions emerged from. Thank you so much for that very, very detailed post. So from this, we can gather that Tokiomi is right about how Sakura's potential to develop into a powerful mage would suffer if she stayed in the family. Plus, also, it wouldn't add to the Tokiomi family legacy either. In his own mind, well, it's not even in his own mind, it's according to the traditions and the actual reality of how power is accumulated over time. Tokiomi did what he thought was best for his daughters, no matter the cost. He truly believes that upholding family legacy and fulfilling your potential takes priority over individual happiness and personal relationships. You know, by his own ethics, and probably by the ethics of these old traditional mage families, he acted correctly, maybe even ethically. In Tokiomi's view, a great responsibility comes with being born with magical abilities. Mages are bound by their blood to do everything that they can to find the root, the origin of all magic. By the way, it was an interesting choice to have the camera at that moment pan from Tokiomi to Kariya across an empty background while Tokiomi was explaining all of this. And then it landed on Kariya just as Tokiomi said, that's what it means to be a child of a mage, as if to emphasize what was left unsaid, which was, you, however, are an utter failure of a mage kid. If one values legacy and preserving magecraft, Tokiomi's logic is valid. Magic is rare and perhaps risks dying out if the mage clans don't take this duty very seriously. The real dispute is over the humanity or the inhumanity of forcing his own values onto his daughters. As a father, should Tokiomi have imposed the same uncompromising devotion to magical lineage and legacy and accumulation of power that he practices himself? And Kenneth Elder had an interesting take on this. So bloodlines matter, and old bloodlines are typically stronger than young ones. They also talked about about the crest. So splitting it between two daughters is effectively halving your family's strength. That said, power doesn't always equal talent, skill, ingenuity, or even success and happiness. This philosophy quickly falls apart if you value people more than mere vessels of their inheritance. This is why mages as a whole in this show are often painted in a bad light. It's an attractive but incomplete and doomed worldview that most mages hold. I think that statement about how power doesn't always equal talent or success or happiness is critical. There is a simple reason for why you could reasonably judge Tokiomi as being wrong, and Kariya expressed it. How could you see your own daughter as just rabble? In other words, how could you reduce your family down to just pawns in a chess game? Tokiomi, he couldn't fathom that Sakura might have preferred living a normal life over becoming a powerful mage. I do think he was wrong to disregard Sakura's right to choose her own path, but I could also imagine Tokiomi's response to that. By the time Sakura became old enough to decide, her mage potential would have already been limited. Not getting the best training early on could have bred its own kind of resentment from Sakura, Who knows? So in a bizarre way, Tokiomi's choice isn't entirely unreasonable and wasn't just about increasing his family's chances of reaching the root, although that was a major part of it. It was, as he said, also doing what was best for Sakura. Overall, though, I do emphasize more with Kariya's criticisms of Tokiomi. To me, it also was wrong to sacrifice his daughter's happiness for the sake of tradition. Power should never come at the cost of family bonds. He essentially discarded Sakura, condemning her to a life of suffering and treating her as just a tool to further his own ambitions, unlike Kariya, who is fighting to protect someone that he loves. An open question, though, I guess to kind of swing the balance more back in Tokiomi's favor, is whether he knew of Zork and Mato's methods of training and the extent of their cruelty. I actually lean towards the fact that he may have suspected, but ultimately decided that the gift of, giving Sakura a future as a mage was worth taking that risk. The fact that Tokiomi genuinely believes that prioritizing legacy and bloodlines over and above personal relationships is the right thing to do doesn't make it any less cruel and inhuman. Tokiomi was berating Kariya for abandoning his duty to his family and for being a traitor to mages generally, but I think Kariya has even stronger grounds for believing that Tokiomi failed at prioritizing and taking responsibility for his own daughter's well-being, and more than that, failing at being a just decent human being. That's why it felt especially ironic when Tokiomi justified killing Kariya because he had failed to take responsibility for himself and was therefore less human, a dog. I wonder what Tokiomi would have felt if he knew Kariya had saved Rin from almost certain death. It's ironic that he shamed Kariya for betraying his blood, but his own bloodline would have been finished, done, if Kariya hadn't intervened and actually cared about people in a way that Tokiomi doesn't. So ultimately, there's this fundamental clash between what these two guys value, and the extent to which you agree with either Tokiomi or Kariya depends on what you think matters most: duty and legacy, or loved ones. And I know that I am more on Kariya's side because I think humans should treat each other humanely and not just as a means to an end. But that doesn't mean that I don't then understand Tokiomi's perspective. Also, wasn't it interesting, just as a side note, that Tokiomi called Kariya a dog, just like how Archer addresses everyone? So I take back anything I ever said about feeling sorry for Tokiomi having to deal with Gilgamesh because they are of the same ilk. At a certain point, Kariya wasn't looking so hot, even for his standards. Slugs were bursting out of him and his attacks weren't landing. To Tokiomi, Kariya's terrible condition probably proved his point. It's like karma for turning your back against your mage birthright. But I also think Kariya deserves a lot of sympathy. He is, in my opinion, Fate Zero's ultimate tragic character. He was born into a mage family and a system whose values that he hates. His so-called duty and his own personal beliefs and desires were fundamentally incompatible, and yet he couldn't walk away from it all, especially not after Sakura became entangled and a victim of this very system. So he committed himself to not just fighting Tokiomi, but also the entire oppressive system that Tokiomi embodies. A system of elitism, of cruelty, of very warped, dehumanizing priorities, and a system that values only magical potential, not human life. One that really doesn't care or hesitate to discard loved ones for the sake of duty. Another tragic aspect of Kariya's character is the possibility of him becoming the very thing that he hates. He selflessly embarked on this quest to save Sakura, but more and more we see him becoming consumed by a kind of madness. His hatred, even his obsession with vengeance, seems to be leading him to dehumanize other mages, even as he criticizes them for their dehumanization of people. So if you think about it, someone like Tokiomi could also be seen as a victim of the cruelty of the mage system. You know, they all grew up in it. They were all twisted by its values. Most people don't become so cold and I guess uncaring in a vacuum. So it's a complicated mess. It is right to hold people personally responsible for treating others inhumanely or just as tools, but often there are also systemic causal factors that should be recognized as well. The one person I think who actually was born cold and devoid of any human empathy is Kirei. He had been watching this entire exchange between Tokiomi and Kariya. He saw how weak and hopeless Kariya's situation was, to the point of being intensively like barbecued from the inside out, and yet Kariya still refused to back down. And that refusal to give up in a hopeless situation, this idea of fighting for what you believe is right, confuses and kind of fascinates Kirei, which feeds his obsession with keeping Kariya alive later. So in a way, Kirei is also turning his back on his duties as a mage, his responsibility to the church, and also helping Tokiomi reach the root. But unlike Kariya, he doesn't feel conflicted or guilty over that. There actually had been a moment where Kirei had been ready to intervene to save Kariya, but then he put away his daggers at the very last minute and just let Tokiomi burn Kariya alive. I think he just wanted to see how it would pan out. He wanted to get more of a kick out of that intense suffering both physically and mentally on Kariya's part, and he wanted to see how much Kariya could withstand. When Kirei later went to retrieve Kariya, maybe just for the pleasure of seeing his burnt body, it was so chilling. I hated how he just so casually grabbed Kariya's hair to look at him before again taking out his daggers to get ready to put him down like an animal. Like, what was going through his mind? Was it, oh, well, I've got my money's worth, the show's over, I may as well just finish him off? But then Kirei remembered Archer's insight into his true nature, how his soul seeks entertainment from human suffering. And so he spared Kariya. He healed him, clearly to prolong Kariya's agonizing existence for his own sadistic amusement. An added bonus, I guess, for Kirei is that Tokiomi thinks Kariya is dead. So why not see how Kariya can get back at Tokiomi, or if not, suffer again at his hands. So while Tokiomi shows disdain and is callous with his relationships, even his closest ones, Kirei's twistedness runs a lot deeper, I think. Someone commented on Kirei's little smile at the end of that scene where he heals Kariya, and I agree that it is the most horrible sight that we've ever seen in Fate Zero so far. More horrible than even what Caster and Ryuunosuke did. Like, he really gets off on exploiting other people's pain. So I feel doubly bad for Kariya now. It became an out of the fry pan into the fire sort of situation. Not only does he not get his revenge against these monstrous mages, but he's completely at their mercy. And I feel in Kirei's hands now, he is with one of the worst possible mages he could be with. Returning to the battle against Caster and Ryuunosuke, we confirmed again that their motivations for carrying out this war is chillingly simple. Ryuunosuke just craves being able to watch or carry out extreme murder with minimal effort, and all he wanted to do really was to enjoy fast food murder. You could say that he got his comeuppance when Kiritsugu gunned him down while he was enjoying the carnage. It was kind of dumb for him to be out in the open, but it really didn't matter to him. All he wanted was to witness the coolness of this people-consuming monster, which is why I don't think he got his just desserts at all. In his dying moments, Ryuunosuke found beauty and peace and the answers to what he's been seeking his whole life. He was able to have this extremely intimate, deranged conversation with God, where he came to understand his true purpose. Like when he asked God, if it was inside me, why didn't you tell me? It was like he was reflecting on his desire for murder and suffering. It showed that he was able to make peace with the fact that this desire was something that he was born with rather than something that he personally chose. And so it kind of reduced his culpability in a way. It also seemed like he was asking, why God gave him such dark urges to kill and yet didn't guide him to unlock that killing potential sooner until Caster came along. So other than being slightly annoyed that God didn't reveal to him earlier his true purpose, there was no poetic justice in Ryuunosuke's death. There was no facing any consequences. There was only Ryuunosuke finding a twisted peace in his final moments. A despairing Caster responded to Ryuunosuke's death by promising him a disturbing gift of ultimate cool, which was a self-sustaining monster that kills indefinitely and that can only be destroyed by Saber's single KO strike, Noble Phantasm. The only problem was that Saber was still handicapped by Lance's curse. I think the way that Kiritsugu used Saber and Lance's commitment to chivalry and fair play to bring down Caster, and also further his own agenda, was clever. He secretly engineered a sequence of events to trick Lancer into removing the curse and freeing Saber to use Excalibur against Caster. And he did that by revealing Saber's noble phantasm to Lancer, which Saber resented. But the revelation made Lancer convince Saber that the truly chivalrous thing for the both of them to do was to stop Caster from persisting in his evil. That the task of upholding justice far exceeded the importance of their own personal battle. And so he broke his spear, which also broke Saber's curse. Now, I have oddly mixed feelings about how this all went down. On the one hand, I think Kiritsugu's actions were morally justified because freeing Saber did serve the greater good overall. However, I did not vibe with the clear disdain he had both for Saber and for Lancer. You could tell that he dismisses them as being kind of emotionally weak and very easy to exploit. There was something quite insidious in the way that he didn't hesitate at all in manipulating the sincerity of their chivalric ideals against them. So while Kiritsugu's scheming achieved an ethical outcome and probably saved a lot of people's lives, the ease with which he treats everyone as pawns to move around, like Tokiomi, reflects a disturbing, really clinical detachment that verges on being unethical. For Saber's part, she remained stubborn until the very end. She never would have revealed her noble phantasm and likely would have tried any other way, including continuing to hack away endlessly at Caster, even if it meant jeopardizing their victory. She really clung to the injury from Lancer as a badge of her pride from an honorable defeat. For her, their truths and the rituals that are attached to it gave her great joy, which is all fine and good, but not while the lives of everyone else in the city hangs in the balance. So this stubbornness, again, is Saber's tragic flaw. She hasn't really learned from her downfall as king that holding fast to perfect ideals can sometimes cost you and everyone else around you everything. There is a lack of wisdom as to when she should compromise for the greater good, as well as a very idealized notion of the fair conduct of war, when in fact she faces opponents who don't adhere to any rules whatsoever. Meanwhile, Ryder's very clever tactic to stall Caster using the Iranian heteroi allowed Kiritsugu to devise his trap. And I think Kiritsugu must have calculated that Ryder would propose this, and it was brilliant on his part to suggest dropping Caster out from the reality marble onto a designated spot for Saber to then take him out. It's worth noting here that Waver really stepped into his coordinating role very naturally. And I love that at first he was a little bit peeved that Ryder told him to stay behind, but then his expression changed as soon as Ryder said that he would need eyes and ears in this world while he was unreachable in the reality marble. So Waver figured out immediately that Ryder was actually relying on him to play an important role. And he really stepped up, even if it was still with a lot of uncertainty. You know, when Kiritsugu asked him if he could do it, he was like, yep, I can, I think, probably, maybe. The sequence of back and forth actions leading to Saber's final killing blow was pretty awesome. So with time running out and the reality marble about to dematerialize, Lancer made a risky move to try and stop Berserker, which cost him a spear and didn't really do much. Also, Berserker can conjure up a freaking Gatling gun. So it is a shame kind of that we'll never know how a showdown between Saber and Berserker's Gatling gun would have turned out, because Archer was finally able to knock Berserker out of the fight. Side note, something really cool about the 3 weapons that Archer flung at Berserker was that when they hit Berserker with a metallic clang, the 3 hits were timed exactly to the triplets that were going on in the music score. So I thought that was cool. What was Archer thinking in that moment? I think he's got to be annoyed that this mongrel has forced him to scramble twice now. But there's also this creepy, smug possessiveness over the fact that only he is allowed to destroy Saber because he wants her as part of his collection. Okay, so Kiritsugu gave the signal, Waver passed on that message, and then Ryder gave some sass when he got back, and then everyone got to witness the power and the radiance of Saber's Excalibur. Now, the key thing I noticed here was that everyone was transfixed by it. Everyone except Gilgamesh, who very smugly waited to pass judgment on Saber's worth. I think that difference, the difference between Archer's reaction versus everyone else's, can be explained by what Excalibur represents. It's worth repeating word for word Irisfield's explanation of what Excalibur is. So that sword is the embodiment of the sad yet noble dream of all soldiers, past, present, and future, who lie dying on the field of battle, clutched to their hearts with their last breath. She carries their will as her pride, bidding them to remain steadfast in their loyalty. So Excalibur, it draws literal power from the hopes of all soldiers throughout all of history who have sacrificed their lives on the battlefield. So how I conceived of it was, in the moment of your last dying breath, all of the superfluous stuff that doesn't really matter gets stripped away, and you're left with what matters to the core of you. Theoretically, the dream that someone still clings to while knowing that they'll no longer be alive to carry that dream out acquires power because it survives even beyond death. Neron Kaiser also gave more info, which I found super helpful. I feel like Ari puts her own poetic spin on the nature of Excalibur, but ultimately she's not far off. It's also called the Sword of Promised Victory and humanity's last phantasm, which is epic. It is, of course, way older than Arturia herself, about 14,000 years, and in the grand scheme of things, she only carried it briefly. Actually, interesting about the 14,000 years, because that's basically all of human history. Pretty much borrowing it from the fairies, there's a certain duality to how Arturia carries both the hopes of Britain as the once and future king, but also by virtue of wielding Excalibur, the hopes of humanity as a whole. The scene nicely shows the sword's nature as a weapon born from the planet itself, when during the charging sequence, it appears to actually gather power from everything around it. Yes, I thought that was pretty cool. Its sheer strength also comes from the fact that it's basically the most recognizable legendary weapon to ever exist. And as we've established before, recognition and fame plays a big part in a heroic spirit's power. Yeah, it's cool how Excalibur's light more broadly represents people's innermost hopes and desires. Also, the collective wish of humanity to see its dreams fulfilled. For Saber specifically, it represents the heavy burden of a king being trusted to carry all her people's hopes and expectations on her own shoulders. And it's a burden that only a true hero could bear. That's why Kiritsugu, Tokiomi, Rider, Waver, and Lancer, they all couldn't help but be drawn to Excalibur's light. Excalibur reminded them, as they are part of humanity also, it reminded them of their own unfulfilled wishes and dreams. And to some extent, they each also experience some measure of Saber's loneliness and the burden of her duty. Tokiomi's burden to secure his family's legacy, Kiritsugu's burden to serve justice, Rider's own kingship and his duty to his soldiers, also Waver's burden to prove himself as someone without any impressive mage ancestry. So they all, in some small way, empathize with Saber, even though Saber's burden, of course, is the greatest of them all. Here's a comment related to Kiritsugu's hopes and burdens from Fintella Versicolor. I love how buried within Kiritsugu's tired heart is the contradictory ideal that forms the center of his character. He believes in the wish-granting device that is the Grail. You'd think someone like him would distrust the very concept of such a device, but the part of him that yearns for peace still desired enough that he became a master. Agree. There's no mistaking Kiritsugu's ruthlessness and his cynicism, but deep down, he is still very, very human, holding on to a very human hope in something that is greater than himself. And I think it would be natural for anyone who has any measure of humanity left in them to be captivated by the sheer sadness and the power and the beauty of Excalibur's light and what it symbolizes, which is the very reason why Archer alone is unmoved. Unlike the others, Archer doesn't give a shit about duty. His only motivating driver is his own entertainment. He has no unfulfilled dreams because, in his own estimation, he is already a god and a king who lacks nothing. And so instead of having the normal response of silence and awe, Archer watched Excalibur with a detached interest that extended only to, okay, so now it's probably worth making Saber mine so that I can have that shiny thing too. After Saber released her noble phantasm, there was a huge explosion of light and it basically cleaved Caster in two. And so again, I'm just going to pull up the other half of Thomas's comment, which relates to this. Man, leave it to Fate Zero to give two really messed up characters more or less a happy ending. Sure, both Ryuunosuke and Caster died, but in death, they both found what they were looking for. They both felt they fulfilled their goals and were at peace at the end. I sure hope our likable characters get the same treatment. Yeah, man, I am totally positive, 100% confident that the characters that I love, in particular Irisville, will get the happy ending that they deserve. I felt cheated by the fact that Caster got absolution in the end. Yes, he was eviscerated by light physically and torn apart quite violently, which is fitting given his life was drenched in enacting violence against innocent victims. But instead, the show chose to frame his final moments introspectively, from Caster's perspective. It was a quiet, positive, peaceful, freeing sort of experience that he had. Remember that Kirei, or Caster, was also a soldier in his lifetime. And as a fallen soldier, it seems that Saber's radiant Excalibur represented salvation for him too, and fulfilled his own unfulfilled dream, or unfulfilled twisted dream, of being reunited with Jeanne d'Arc. He had this vision, I guess, of being rewarded for his devotion to her and to God. At least that's how I read this image of Jeanne d'Arc's smile and his outstretched hands. I wondered what he was trying to say with his last words, what have I, and then he goes, and my best guess is that he was saying, what have I done? Maybe it was the beginnings of the very, very slightest stirrings of guilt. Who knows? But there really was no clear indication of remorse for the kids that he had murdered. And it could have very well just been guilt for questioning his faith, for not believing that he would one day be reunited with Jeanne d'Arc. His very twisted, messed up version of faith. What was troubling was that there was no final reckoning with the carnage that he had visited on countless victims. Instead, he just basks in this light's forgiving warmth, it seems. And it was the same pretty much for Ryuunosuke. Despite committing these terrible, violent atrocities, both of them died, as the comment said, feeling fulfilled after finding meaning in cruelty and murder. Meanwhile, their victims are just forgotten. Remember the kid that Ryuunosuke had captured right at the start of the show, when he had first summoned Casta, and Casta had kind of given the boy hope of escape by just motioning towards the door as if he was letting him go, and then just killed him as he was running towards that door, towards safety. What did Casta say? He said something along the lines of, it's more fun to dangle hope in front of them and then snuff out that hope in an instant. Well, Casta had a hope too of one day finding Joan of Arc and of finding peace with God, and no one was there to crush it. You know, he got what he wanted. He got to the safety of that door, which is what makes Fate Zero such an interesting show. The peaceful manner in which Casta and Ryuunosuke went out left a bad taste in my mouth, but in a good way. You know, it didn't go where it should have or it was expected to go, and it really provokes reflection from the person watching. It's like, how do we feel about evil that goes unpunished? And the show really forces us to confront some really uneasy truths about the real world, because that's exactly how it is there. Sometimes justice is elusive and some monsters die happy without paying for their sins. We ended with an interesting conversation between Ryder and Asha, where we saw two very different reactions to Saber's power. When Ryder witnessed Excalibur, he respects her power and the noble vision that it represents or symbolizes, but he's also quite horrified by the crushing burden that it is that Saber bears, and he doesn't think that any one person should bear the weight of everyone's hopes, least of all someone as young as her. And so he pities Saber. He sees her story as a tragedy, someone who was forced into kingship as a child and brainwashed into believing that she herself had chosen it. She essentially never got to live life on her own terms. So by sacrificing her own life and desires to selflessly serve her people, he thinks that Saber lost her humanity. Remember, he is the one who believes that a king is one who lives for himself as well as for the people. And it's why it leads him to dismiss Saber's claim to be a true king. But you know what was really interesting as I was thinking about Ryder's continuing dismissal of Saber as king, even as he respects Excalibur. If we peek at the actual pages of history with regards to Alexander the Great, the end of Alexander the Great, he became so wrapped up in his own dream of pushing eastwards and conquering the lands there that his men ended up mutinying because they'd been fighting for so long and they just wanted to pack up and go home. Alexander also clashed with and murdered some of his most trusted advisors because they saw him as too readily adopting the local Persian customs of the land that they had conquered, including demanded being treated like a god and abandoning this very Greek ideal of like a warrior's restraint in favor of decadence and of debauchery. Like Alexander the Great developed a taste for holding these super lavish banquets that were essentially just wild parties. It is ironic that Ryder assumes Saber doesn't understand what it takes to be a true king, based on her style of total self-sacrifice, when his own self-indulgent style also eventually led to mutiny. Like, it wasn't a pretty end either. And that's kind of conveniently left out in Fate, or at least in Ryder's recounting of what a true king should be. I feel like he underestimates how Saber's profound sense of duty and sense of selflessness translates into a special kind of strength that is different to his. It is precisely because her nation's hopes rested with her, or that she took that upon herself, that she is so powerful. And not just the nation's hopes, but also all of humanity's hope. There's this inability on Ryder's part to comprehend this particular brand of power, and I actually think it's become kind of a blind spot of his. While Archer thinks about how painful it is for Saber to bear this sort of burden, Archer, on the other hand, proceeds to be a total creep and finds that very same pain beautiful in a really twisted sort of way. And you can understand his reasoning if you just remember that he has this intense fetish for suffering. To Archer, Saber represents like the ultimate suffering, dying full of regret, knowing that you are unable to fulfill the hopes and dreams of your people at the end, despite believing that you were the only one responsible for doing the job. He enjoys the pain of her failure to meet these almost impossible expectations. And Ryder's just like, dude, that is messed up. And he's right. Like, the way that Archer objectifies Saber is disgusting. Like, while he is impressed by her, at the end of the day, he still just wants to possess her. What's weird is that Archer, he oscillates between wanting to possess Saber as the ultimate trophy and also wanting to be the one who destroys her and her very noble dream of fulfilling hopes and dreams. It's like he wants to add a second trauma on top of the lifetime of pain that she already lived through. He is a real narcissistic piece of work. In sum, both Ryder and Archer dismiss Saber for different reasons, and they have, at the end, this little snarky exchange over how they'll be the last two competitors left standing in the Grail War. Despite witnessing Excalibur's power, they both still dismiss Saber as a real threat. And I wonder, especially for Ryder, I think, I wonder if that wasn't a little foreshadowing that his overconfidence might contribute in some way to his downfall. Certainly, Archer has his own twisted outcome in mind, something like involving Saber, which I don't even want to think about. And it doesn't align with Ryder's view that they will be the last two having a final standoff. So who knows what's going to happen. Episode 3 of Season 2, Fate Zero. Here we go in 3, 2, 1, play. Kenneth? Kenneth still's in the game? Rise just needs to retire, man. Just cash in that pension. Man, you mean you gotta hand it to Kenneth. He's got resilience. Wait, reward for the defeat of Caster? I mean, it wasn't his servant though that did the job. Yeah, okay. I do love that this OP links like Kiritsugu's childhood to his current vigilante mission for justice. Just really curious to see if we get that background story from Kiritsugu. Like, what childhood trauma led him to be like this? I'm not looking forward to that scene though, with Arisville, whatever that was. Man, these two make such a good couple. I mean, I'm all for like Sabari, but Kiritsugu and Arisa also complement each other really well. She's like the one bright spot in his life. Well, oh, Maya. Oh, shit. Oh, those command seals. Wait. Oh, so the command seals have to be physically attached to you. Oh no. Oh man, guys, just right out of the gate, man. I was not prepared. I just had my morning coffee. Ooh. Oh shit. Does that mean Kenneth is also ruined? Now you're thinking about that. Oh, it's so creepy. It's great. An important role, but sort of a minor one. Kenneth. Oh man. It's just really scraping the bottom of the barrel now, isn't he? Just hashing out some legalities there. Too easy. Wow. What they incorporate like the drinking of the wine into this ritual. That's interesting. There is a degree of naivete in Rise that it's quite hard to believe. Oh my god. Uh, oh, oh my god, he just offed the Rise. Yo, this episode is nuts. Hate Candace, man. Even more unlikable than Tokiomi. Lancer doesn't deserve this. She's one of those people that cannot see any sense of responsibility. Like, he's not responsible for anything. He can do no wrong. Oh no, the mole. Man, he's really, really pushing Lance's buttons. That's a real pressure point there. An impossible dream. Can't fight nobly with a guy like that. He's gonna make Lancer do horrible things and he's just gonna die inside. This is like the opposite of the relationship between Tokiomi and Archer. They're gonna have their fight now. She probably doesn't. I mean, Saber would not condone the slicing off of someone's right arm like that from the shadows. Lancer didn't really expend much of his energy, right? Oh boy. These two just need to go to a bar and have a drink, call it a night. Come on. That's a freaking long spear. I mean, she did just release Excalibur. Oh, oh no. No, Saber. This is so frustrating. Oh. Wait, what? How does that? Okay. The I don't know, man. Sure. I mean, if it gives them some sort of mental edge, sure. These two are such dorks. It is kind of heartwarming, though. If he kills Solo E now, Lancer will lose, right? I love the explanation just on the side for our benefit. What is the condition though? Just to give up his claim to the Grail? Does he really love Solo E? I mean, oh my god! Wait. Oh oh my god! No. Oh god! Oh my god! Saber's just gonna be so traumatized by this too. The one thing that he could have. Ugh. I have a feeling that, like, in future Fate series, that Dear Mode will come back as this super vengeful spirit. Contrast that ending, that agonizing ending. Mario! This is what is happening. Oh shit, Kiritsugu is so stone cold, man. I mean, it's so brilliant. I mean, it's smart as. Oh shit. Oh my god. Oh, oh shit. She's gonna get him. No, he's gone too far with the means. Yeah. Arisel is also a little bit disillusioned. You know what? I feel like Arisel knew that this is how Kiritsugu operates, but she wanted to believe that if they had a mutual goal, it would be okay, but oh man. He doesn't sound wrong. But Saber's also right too. You know, like the Geneva Convention and all that. And I feel so bad for Ari as well, just being stuck in the middle of these two. Oh, I don't know. Oh, I don't know, man, Kiritsugu. I feel like that some part of it, because of how he looks down on people who rely on honor, part of it is him teaching Saber a lesson, I feel. That's what I want to know. Saber having a rare moment of insight that cuts to Kiritsugu's heart. He sees himself as the savior of the world, essentially. You know, bearing the sins of all humanity so that future humans don't have to suffer. Well, that episode just went just so quick. It was like cutting off of Soloi's right hand, which was like shocking. And then it was the murder of Rise, a betrayal that, you know, you probably could see coming because it's Kenneth. But then the whole setup with leading Saber to fight Lancer, taking Soloi to make sure that Kenneth signed that contract so that he would make Lancer commit suicide. That was the person I feel the worst for is Lancer. Obviously, he was the one thing that kept him going in this world as a spirit was that he could have a proper, honorable fight with another knight who shared his ideals, and that was taken away from him in the most humiliating manner possible, and at the hands of people who couldn't care less about that sort of ideal of having a good, honorable fight. Oh, man. I still feel what a great dialogue between Saber and Kiritsugu. Because when one of them was speaking, like when Kiritsugu was talking about how humanity has never learnt since the Stone Ages that the battlefield is not a glorious, honorable setting. There is no honor in killing another human being. Just give me a sec. And I was like, yeah, that's right. At the end of the day, killing is killing. And, lots of tyrants in history have glorified war in order to lead masses of people to believe that it is right to kill, when in fact it's just another cover for pursuing selfish ambitions. But then when Saber spoke about how this sort of unprincipled killing without any rules of war leads to a continuous cycle of hatred and violence and killing and hatred and violence and killing, I was like, but that's right too. When you have no principles governing the manner in which you take a life, it sows more seeds of hatred and destruction for later generations. We'll sit down and have a talk about this later. Man, that was overall an episode just packed. I don't remember an episode being so packed. I feel like things are really starting to pick up speed. All right, guys, let's move on to episode 4. Man, you'd think that I'd be prepared for these sudden deaths and murders and changes in fate, but I was not. I was not ready, and I will never be ready. So here we go in 3, 2, 1, play. Brisset is dead, so doesn't that put a stop to the competition? Is he gonna just feel nothing? Don't smile. Okay. Okay. Despite what Kirei is, which is a psychopathic monster who loves creating pain for others, I feel like for someone who raised him as a child and, enveloped him, yes, in the teachings of the church, but also probably acted as a proper father too, Kirei has to feel a bit of anger or wanting to find out who did this to his father. Right? I mean, he has no one to take revenge against now because Kenneth is bloody offed already. I'm still getting over how Kiritsugu orchestrated the whole thing. Since we've got a bit of time, what was really interesting was Iris feels difficulty with having to work with Kiritsugu and having to accept that this is how he carries out his mission. When she was like, look, Kiritsugu, you have to explain this to Saber. Don't talk to me. I feel like it was sort of implicit admitting that she knew that this is how things might have panned out, that she was going to have a certain level of acceptance for his methods. But she still felt bad for Saber. Here we go, Tokiomi. Another one with inflexible principles. In certain cases. Hacha just, no matter what happens, Hacha just enjoys the show. Foreshadowing. Archer's like, you've not seen anything yet, Tokiomi. But what happened to Kariya? Wait, does he really not feel anything? Okay, maybe I was just totally off base with Kirei. Like, he is actually through and through no feelings, no personal connections. Ari. Is it because things are progressing so quickly that her body is preparing for shutdown? Ugh, that means Saber has to work with Archer. So interesting that Arisul is knows this already. Like Kirei is a true threat. I feel like Tokiomi is the one to go next. He's gonna die in Fuyuki. And of course, we get this touching family reunion scene just before he gets killed. If you wish to be a mage, isn't hasn't the decision already been made for her? He sounds like he knows he's gonna die. Who knows, maybe Tokiomi has something up his sleeve, even in death. Yes, let's introduce you both. Waiver. Still being that random factor. You're really gonna go for Ryder? And the second is Kirei. He he doesn't seem phased. Nice. But what? What is inevitable? Is it because homunculus they eventually return back to being, I don't know, they can't sustain being human for that long? What? Wait. She's the vessel for the grail? Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, huh? Okay, the scabbard's with her. Wait, does that mean the grail is inside Irisville? Hmm. That's why you should chain yourself to Saber, girl. He's probably starting to pity her now. What an interesting mutual understanding that we've reached between these two. I mean, they're both working for Kiritsugu and laying down their lives for his goal, getting the grail. He's dead. He's dead. Oh, God. I don't want to watch this. Even if it's Tokiomi, I mean... I'm still asking the same question. Here we go with Archer just cinching the deal. Okay, so because Kirei was actually just packing his papers and gonna leave. What makes me happy? The biggest fear is facing like what he is. Like truly. Oh god, Archer's just like whispering these words into his ear. Archer the snake. Wait, did Briseis command seals transfer to him? Ah, oh, shit. Some password. John 424. Okay. I hate that it's using like something from like a holy text to spur him on. Mm-hmm. And that entertains Archer because he's like, Kirei, you really don't have any sense of self-preservation, but it's because you know that we're on the same boat because we both hate Tokiomi. Including himself. Because he needs, yeah, he needs one to kill the servant. That's awful. Yep, does not care for the servant. Archer really is just leading Kirei one step at a time to the water. This is it. These two bros, man. They're so in sync on this psychopathic, sadistic wavelength. it's it's just a shame. How can Tokiomi not see through Kirei? No. Oh, this is so terrible. After Kirei kills Tokiomi, he is going to train Rin as another sort of weird, twisted entertainment. Like training the daughter of the person you murdered. No. No. Oh, he's gonna use it to kill Tokiomi. It's the symbolism. Oh, being killed by a dagger that's like representative of the Tokiomi name. Don't turn your back. Do not turn your back to him. Oh no. Oh god. Oh no, you get another Kirei smile. No. Why is this music so creepy? Okay, it's done. It's done. Can he do something? Can he suffuse his mana, concentrate it? No, he's done. He's done. Okay, so he would have killed Kirei. Would he say himself? I just noticed Archer's snake trousers, snakeskin trousers. uh, no, this is peak entertainment. And they're doing this over Tokiomi's dead, bleeding body. And then, what is he going to do with the Grail? I guess just ask it for his life's purpose. Well, the eighth contract. Oh, God. Oh. Is this how it's going to be now? Every episode up until the last one, we're going to have someone die. Terrible, betrayed death. Hey, I'm going to ask that question again. Do I feel bad for Tokiomi? Yes, I feel bad for Tokiomi. He, to the end, remained completely blind to the nature of Kirei's motivations. Naive to a deathly fault. I thought, you know what though? Kirei needed Archer to push him towards making the decision to say and to carry out the betrayal. Because even after having had his fun with Kariya and saved him and dumped him on the steps of the church, and after Tokiomi, was telling him, well, I have to let you go so that we can enter into this temporary ceasefire with the Ironsburns, Kirei was going to do it. Like, he was still unsure of whether he wanted to go for the Grail for his own sake. He was packing up his papers, being like, yeah, well, I guess I will listen to Tokiomi after all. Maybe he thought that he'd had his fun, that he was closer to the answers that he was looking for with regards to the purpose of his life and whether there was anything inside him that was worth living for. But he was still unsure of whether he had the resolve to really go for the Grail until Archer started up right next to him and whispered those poisoned words and was like, haven't you made your decision yet, Kirei? Don't you want to find out more? Don't you want to see where this ride ends? Key point being, he needed an enabler. And Archer was right there to give him just the right words so that he could stab Tokiomi literally in the back. I would love to get your guys' thoughts on, well, first of all, who did you side more with on the issue of whether there can be any measure of honor in war, Saber or Kiritsugu? And I suspect, I don't know, because it's how I personally feel. I suspect that most people would struggle to come down strongly on any one side because I thought there were good arguments on both. From Saber's point of view, having a code of honor or like a rules of engagement, even when conducting war, I guess limits potential excess in cruelty. So even though you may be called to take another person's life, at least you do it while keeping your own humanity intact. I guess it also helps limit your purpose for killing. Like, for example, there are arguably legitimate reasons for using violence, such as defending your own country, like Saber did as King Arthur. However, on the other hand, sometimes if you refuse to fight using certain means, even if it means that you forfeit victory, that can also cause problems. So Kiritsugu's main criticism of Saber, and I actually don't think he's wrong, is that if you limit the ways by which you secure victory, you might end up dragging the conflict out for longer than it has to, and you end up risking more casualties of war. Because for him, war is fundamentally cruel. So by pretending there's any fairness or modicum of honor in war, it only prolongs war and costs more lives. So his methods, I think, are aimed more at ending conflict quickly and decisively. So if you can save more lives by sacrificing your own humanity, he thinks it's a price worth paying. So yeah, to be honest, even though I hated how Lancer died, like, I still remember his totally contorted face and his justifiable rage at the way in which he died. I can't go so far as to say that Kiritsugu shouldn't have dispatched of all three of them in that way. He did have a good point about just removing that risk of Lancer going to another master. Like, he had to kill Kana, Soloi, and Lancer all at the same time. So actually related to a servant being forced to commit suicide, which is horrible, I actually wonder what Saber would think about Kirei's revelation that the last servant standing also has to die in order for the Grail to be activated. Like, I don't know if Kirei is right about that. I suspect he is, given that Risei was the one who was running the competition. So does that mean then that she won't get her wish after all, even if she wins with Kiritsugu, or that none of the servants will? You know, how does that work? Because I don't think it's ever been made clear whether only the winning master gets to make a wish with the Grail. There just seems to have been this constant assumption by all the servants that they too get to make a wish, but I don't really know anymore. What was so complicated about this disagreement between Saber and Kiritsugu is that they both want essentially the same thing, to protect innocent people and I guess fight for justice. And Saber, interestingly, actually recognized that in Kiritsugu, but ultimately rejected that he and her are on the same page because his methods to her taint his supposed commitment to justice. I think I was more in Arasville's position, you know, caught between two irreconcilable positions, and sort of seeing like the merits of both. Interestingly, you know, Arasville, she has worked with Kiritsugu and so presumably has accepted his methods in order to win the Grail, which is why she really can't pass judgment on him. On the other hand, I feel like she has really come to respect Saber's commitment to honorable conduct and her unwillingness to use others as a mere means to an end. And I feel like she doubly appreciates that refusal to use anyone, because she herself was used or created solely for the purpose of being the vessel of the Holy Grail. Lest we forget that particular bombshell. I will have to go back to pick through exactly what that entails, but it seems like she either is like a vessel for the Grail, which doesn't make much sense, or she is actually the Grail. So the Grail as in the vessel, and therefore Arasville is that, except in human form, which would explain why she keeps getting weaker and weaker. It seems that Arasville cannot coexist with the Grail in this world, because the closer the war draws to an end, the more she has to, I guess, if she is the Grail herself, return back to her original form, which is the lifeless form of the Grail. The other massive development in these episodes is that Kirei is now fully committed to his quest to find answers to the meaning of his life. You know, he did the deed of offing Tokiomi, and I feel like he did it in the most backstabby, most heartless way possible, because to his very last moment, Tokiomi placed his faith in Kirei, not only to continue supporting him in his Grail war, but to take care of and train his own daughter. There was also that chilling twist suggested by Archer and not denied by Kirei, that killing Tokiomi somehow made up for Kirei missing out on the opportunity to kill his own dad. It just seems like he resents the both of them for trying to raise and teach him to be like them, you know, so-called virtuous and dedicated to the church and to securing the route for mages. You know what? He probably also hated them for unknowingly putting these limitations on his ability to further explore his darker urges. So it kind of felt like Kirei blames Risei and Tokiomi for things that aren't really their fault. Like, it's not their fault that he has this innate sadistic taste for cruelty and for other people's suffering. I think that's pretty much all of the thoughts that have been rolling off the top of my head straight after watching these two episodes. I'm sure that a lot more stuff will come to light when I go back and rewatch and when I start reading your comments, because I feel like we are really, I say this every time, but getting deeper and deeper into the meatiness of, you know, the right and wrong of certain characters' decisions, often the case of two opposing viewpoints that both have their merits. And then of course you've still got the craziest of crazies, Kirei, really coming into himself now, and it's just a matter of, you know, waiting to see how much further he can fall into his sadistic depths. So yeah, thanks so much for watching Fate Zero with me. I'm still really enjoying it so far, and yeah, let me know your thoughts, put it down in the comment section, and I will get back to you and we will discuss it next time. So until then, take care, guys.